13, I was really struggling a lot, kind of just felt myself spiraling and unraveling, but I didn't really feel the support in a way of people who knew enough about grief. So not that there wasn't people around me that were supportive. I have a great support system, a lot of phenomenal people in my life that were absolutely there for me, but not really speaking specifically to the grief or able to give advice and guidance and really say what's really going on deep down inside. And so I just felt like, okay, I'm going to try to do little things to keep her memory alive. I'm going to lean more into my poetry. This is back when J. Nicole the poet existed, right? She's kind of somewhere, I don't know where, but not here right now. And so that was kind of more so back at that time. And then you fast forward to 2016, I lost my grandmother. And then 3 more years, I lost my father in 2019. And so from that point, I'm just like, okay, I've got to do something. I felt the burden on my heart. And I think that's just how things work, where you're more so burdened than other people, where some people might be a little bothered by grief and loss or et cetera. But for me, it was like, wow, like this is this thing. And it's this thing that keeps happening to me and in a deep way. So from there, I decided to launch my podcast, the Grief Bully podcast, which I actually launched on my late grandmother's birthday, August the 19th, 2019. And I'm just released episode 82. I'll be recording 83 tomorrow. And so I just been pushing along, and then I kind of changed my social media from being more so the spoken word artist and just being more of that life impacting communicator, and then the podcast host and producer, because that's what it all comes down to, is just using my voice that I believe God gave me and my wisdom to help people that are in similar struggles as myself.
That's excellent. Thank you so much for sharing that. And so I've, like many people, I've had the opportunity to kind of see this flourish and grow. And I believe I remember the shift, like kind of after your father transitioned, and you kind of just like really diving into managing your own grief, but extending yourself to be able to help others. So tell me more about this shift, like how you think the podcast is helping others, or the content, the things that people may bring to you, the conversations that you have. Like, how is this becoming the Grief Bully really affecting those around you?
Yeah, absolutely. I would be completely remiss if I didn't say that it's hard sometimes. Some days it's tough because, again, we're not talking about the latest trending news or entertainment or what's going on with Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, right? This is not to say that that's not serious, her, wanting to end her life, but these are things that are heavy on a daily basis. And so when people are reaching out and having these conversations with me, I've had to really dig deep to find that balance, because I'm definitely not a therapist by trade. I didn't go to school for it, and I never portrayed myself to be that. I'm only here to help you through my lived experience. And what I've learned, though, even with trying to push folks to get therapy and professional help, they want to have a conversation with someone that they feel gets it. And so I think that's where the biggest impact has been able to be had, is because, for one, a lot of the people that I interact with look like me. And so they are seeing that, okay, and from our community and from our culture, it's okay to talk about these things, and that I don't have to just pray all of this stuff away and just give everything to God and have no work part of the faith. And so I think that's kind of what the biggest PS is that they're seeing someone go through it in real time with them. So every day for me is not a great day. I've been on Instagram Live crying. I've been on Instagram Live right after crying, face red, tissues in hand. And it's a vulnerability that I don't really feel is optional, only because I feel like God called me to this. So I try to find that privacy balance, but at the same time, I try to give you guys as much of me as I possibly can without completely not having any privacy, but showing you this is real. I'm not giving you the highlight reel. I'm giving you the real of how this is. And so I think that's what's allowed the Grief Bully to be impactful, is because I'm not looking for the best words. My punctuation is not always on point, but what I'm saying to you is real. And a lot of people, it hits home with them. And I think also the Blue Hearts have allowed the community to say, hey, I'm there. I understand, without having to really have words to communicate. Some people do write lengthy comments, but a lot of times it's just, hey, drop a blue heart if you feel me. And that has shown to be successful in creating a community around grief. So,
yeah, I think it's important when you're dealing with community, when you're dealing with the public, to be relatable, to be authentic. I think people just generally want to be able to connect. And we lost a huge piece of that last year with all of our, isolation and separation, but life was still happening and life was still moving on and moving forward. And people had to not just go through things, but go through things alone.
yeah.
So it was really, I value the work that you're doing, because it's just so hard to be relatable and or not so hard, but so necessary to be relatable and be authentic and connect during this time, during a pandemic. One of the things that hit the hardest for me was the way that people were transitioning, people passing away from COVID complications, and not really, we were seeing a change in the way we celebrate lives. So in our culture, when someone passes away, you either have this grand funeral or you have, a big party. People have celebrations of life in different ways. But it just seemed to me that people were being more remembered for the way that they died and not the way that they lived. And that affected me in a personal way, even though I am blessed to say that I do not have anyone that was close to me that suffered in that way. But just being impacted enough to feel that type of energy around me, like driving by and seeing funeral lines with 2 cars in it, like that affected me in a really hard way. And even if people did not transition from COVID complications and just transition because of the limits on large gatherings, people just were not able to get together and have these kinds of celebrations that we would typically have to honor, our loved ones, which I feel like is really, has been important and a staple in our culture. Mm-hmm. So people, I feel like last year was a really tough time with that, finding these ways to manage your grief. When we think about these, I call them celebrations of life, or your typical funeral. When we think about these celebrations of life, it's usually a time of family, where people can connect and be around, be around love, share memories. And that was just really taken away from everyone. So how are people managing? How did people manage? Because that's such a huge piece of the way that we process our grief.
Yeah, I thank you for sharing that. Yeah. And I think we need more of that. I think we need more of just the human part of it, that it doesn't matter the proximity of relationship, but if you're a human and you do possess empathy, then it's going to affect you. It's similar to, say, for example, when celebrities die or people who we haven't actually met pass away and we're affected by it. So thank you for humanizing that and showing people that it is okay to feel, even if it doesn't look from a certain perspective that you were directly impacted by the loss. Yeah. What I learned through this too, before I get to what I think people are dealing with, is that it's taught me to appreciate your worst moments in life, no matter what. And this is why, because I remember feeling like it was so detrimental to go back and forth to the hospital to see my dad dying, literally watching that happen. Same thing with my grandmother. But if I look at how people had to deal last year and still currently to an extent, they didn't have that privilege. And so who would have ever thought that being able to have a front seat to my dad's life ending would be considered a privilege or a blessing? But it really was like two of the worst times in my life. And I look back and I'm like, wow, I actually was really blessed, because I can imagine how difficult Queen, I would have lost my mind if I couldn't get to that hospital. I'm talking about calling these doctors and nurses, going there, we're in shifts, my aunt's there, my family's there, like going back and forth. And to have that taken away, how do you even begin to process and build that closure? And I'm doing closure like this because I'm not a big advocate of the word closure, because I just don't know how necessary it really is in the process. But for some people it is, and they've really struggled a lot with that. There's been a lot of anger that I've heard from people, feeling very robbed, very cheated, and just in just a place of being stuck. So more so than closure, just having that roadblock to being able to begin that healing process. Because in some cases, when it was really in the height of it, people in New York, for example, they're just putting bodies in trucks outside of hospitals and just putting like tags on them. And so, like you said, people aren't being remembered for their lives, and there's more heightened to highlight about their death. And it's been just so much that I really don't know how all of us are actually still smiling and processing and not becoming so numb and jaded. And even for myself, scrolling my social media, I've had to really check in with me and say, wow, like, are you becoming really just numb to this? Because it's so many RIP today, RIP, oh, rest in peace, that person. Oh, pray for my so-and-so, up, they didn't make it. Like, it's just been like every single day. So I do think that people are really struggling with that and will struggle with that for quite some time. I had a loved one who did not pass from COVID, but did pass away during the pandemic. And we had an outside funeral, literally in the parking lot of the funeral home. We were outside. And even though we were able to gather, you weren't gathering without caution and concern. So you wanting to like hug your people and embrace them. Then you get in your car, you're like, oh crap, like who's going to end up having COVID? Did everybody get their test? Like, we don't want to go through this again. So it's just been a domino effect. And I think just like you and I, a lot of people have struggled and will continue to struggle. And based on what I've been through and imagining what they're going through, I think it will be something very difficult to move forward and be able to get through that for sure.
Yeah. And I mean, the process is so individualized. People manage their emotions very differently. But when it comes to grief, people do some very like different things with their energy, you know. Some people want to like keep pushing so they can move forward so they don't really have to, you know, talk or think about it. And other people kind of lament and stay there, rest even in their grief. So it's very touchy. Like, you can't tell someone how to grieve because we all have these ideas of what that means for us or how this particular incident even affects me in a way that I should grieve.
I think that's I think that's one of the challenges of being the grief bully, though, is that I'm like this raw, right? So I'm this person, if you will, that if you follow me on social media, it can be, I think at times, I don't want to say intimidating, but for those people who don't want to really confront, talk about, look at, or deal with their grief, it kind of can put you in limbo. It can put you in a weird space. And so I try to tread lightly with that, but also keep it in mind the people that do need to hear it. But I am aware of how that can be. For example, my own family, where I have siblings and nephews and people that follow me that if I post my father or my grandmother or whatever I'm saying, that's their life as well. So they might not process the same way I do, and they really don't. They don't really process the way that I do when they're not as communicative, verbally expressive. And so that's just a prime example that being aware, again, like you said, that everyone is totally different, but this is the key to it. No one's wrong.
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely correct. That reminds me of a similar situation. I had posted a picture of me and my grandfather. We don't have many pictures together where it's just him and I. And so I just posted it in memory of him, celebrating him. And my brother commented on the photo and was like, wow, I could have really dealt without seeing this today. And I didn't even recognize that me posting that photo would even affect him in that way. For me, it was just like, oh, this is a day that I'm choosing to celebrate my grandfather, or, I just took this short little stroll down memory lane. You come across a picture and it's like, you don't want to forget. So you you're putting your energy out there. But for him, it was like a reminder of this very like close relationship that they had that's not there anymore. So we had an interesting conversation surrounding that. But I think it speaks to the vast difference of how people manage their grief. My grandfather passed away in 2018. 2018. And it was 2 days after an uncle of mine passed away. And it was on both of, my grandfather on my dad's side and my uncle on my mom's, like my mom's brother and my dad's dad. So the whole family was just,
yeah.
And they had, really been there, like supporting each other while they're taking care of their loved ones. And then one day it was just like, they didn't know what to do anymore because their life was so full of care, caring for them. And they just woke up and like held each other and was like, okay, we have to move on. We have to live life for ourselves. It's so interesting. Well, human beings are just interesting.
Yeah, for sure.
Like, God, why did you create us with all these feelings and emotions? I don't know. They're all over the place. But yeah, that reminded me of how like that vast difference of how you can just perceive, when one transitions or perceive how someone else is even grieving.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a lot of layers to it for sure.
So many layers. So one question I want to ask is, what does support look like really for someone who may be grieving or may not, necessarily be displaying these very overt characteristics of grief, but just like still need support. Like if you're the friend or you're the family member, how do you support someone who is just trying to manage their grieving process on their own?
Yes, I get asked that question a lot, actually. And it's funny you mentioned that. That's actually a video I'm making soon, just based on some research I did and topics that people do search for. And so that was a big one, is how to support. And it would say different things, like how to support a person who's lost a spouse. How do you support? And it was just some multiple layers there. And I think the question that you actually asked me is the one that I always offer first and foremost, is to ask that person, what does support look like? Because as we just talked about, as far as the grieving process goes, everyone's different and what they would need and what they would feel. But I don't really think that anyone is exempt from acknowledgement and that being a great piece for them to feel supported. Mm-hmm. So even if they don't take the support in the way in which you're going to give it, to just be acknowledged sometimes that we understand where you are and that it can be difficult. We might not know 100%. It didn't happen to us. You might not be expressing as much and knowing that. But if it's your people, your friend, your family member, whoever, you kind of should know them. Not should, I'm not going to make that. But you, for the most part, know how people move. And you can tell if something's like off with them, whether they want to say it or not. And sometimes I think it's better to kind of be like overly attentive than to retreat out of fear of uncomfortability and making them mad or whatever. So like, I'd rather be mad at my friends and family for like, you guys are doing too much. Like, I am okay. Than the opposite, where I'm like, wow, like no one is saying anything at all to me. But a lot of times people's silence gets misinterpreted for lack of support, but really it's just an uncomfortability and them having a lack of direction or knowing. And so my most recent episode actually was talking about this, how the non-bereaved and the bereaved people, what we can do to bridge that gap. And a lot of that is listening, which is a two-way thing. You got to really listen and then talk. But I think that we can't, as people who are dealing with grief, just expect everybody to know, to get it, to understand, to want to be there. It's just not something that we should expect, because as a society, I just put this up, we suck at grieving, period. From the workplace, given the right amount of time and understanding in that, from culture and then religion and so many different things that hinder us being able to do that. But communication, I think, is going to be the best bet for support. So asking the person, maybe you just send them a text thinking of you. Maybe you just send them a heart emoji, like small, subtle things, if they're not willing to answer your question. Hey, what does support look like? I'm a hugger. I'm a feeler. This person. That's how I get support. Somebody, this is not really me, but I'm saying this is how somebody might get support. But other person might be like, no, like, I'm not really with that. I am a communicator. Somebody might not really talk much. So it's like two people speaking two different languages. You've got to kind of find that commonality, and you can't force your way on somebody. Yo, I keep calling him. I keep calling her. She not answering. I don't care. Like, what am I supposed to do? Well, just don't give up. You don't have to do it maybe every single day or be abrasive. You can be subtle, because this is the thing. In my darkest moments, I know who was there for me and who wasn't. Whether I was in fully engagement with you or not, I can distinctly remember people reaching out. And what rings louder is the people that didn't. So for whatever your reason was, again, maybe it's just you did not know how to approach that. But your silence is interpreted as lack of support. Now, this was earlier on in my journey. I'm wise enough now to know that some people just might not know how to address that or to be there, whatever the case is. There are some people who couldn't attend services that I had for family, but they made it to repasses. Just certain things, because everybody is not with funerals. So you can't take somebody not coming to your loved one's funeral as they don't care about you. Because now that I lost my people, I really don't like going to funerals like that. It's just a thing that it will put me right back into those moments. And so you kind of got to find that line. Like, if I really have to go, if it's like, then I'm going to do it. But if I could like choose not to, one of my friends passed away in November, and I used to be a person that would go to his funeral, but I just went to the viewing. It was just me, him. And I kind of think this might have actually been worse for me. It might have been better to go to the funeral with other people, but I'm learning. But I just went to the viewing and was able to just kind of sign in and do my thing that way. So I say all of that to say we're all different. We're all unique, but we all have a self-care language, and we all have a way in which we want to be supported and we give support, but we will never understand that if we don't open those lines of communication.
Yes, thank you for mentioning that specific term, self-care language, because as you were talking, I was like, this is reminding me of love languages, how people want to be loved versus how people choose to love others. And so the balance of that is how people want to be supported, but don't necessarily know how to communicate, this is how I want to be supported, versus people who want to offer support, but don't necessarily know how they can be of support to someone.
I gotta say, I learned that from a very wise woman, and I might happen to be married to that person, but I can't still 100% credit on the self-care love language. That's something that I've learned on my journey from her. So shout out to the psychiatric psychology part of that. So I could let that slide. I should have let it slide because it made me sound really good. But I don't do that.
Listen, that jumped right out at me. I feel like I'm about to start Googling self-care languages.
Yeah, there's like a whole checklist. I think she showed me before. It's like a whole thing. And I was like, wow, that is really deep to understand that, like you said, we talk about just love and more so of a romantic relationship, but just even in platonic or in our workplace or wherever we are, understanding that we all heal and want to move through that in a different way. And what we need to help us with that is also going to be different. So,
yeah. So thanks for that. I might maybe see an Adina J designs floating around our YouTube. So thank you for joining us and blessing us with self-care languages. Because now I feel like I have something to dive into.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to touch a little bit on, how do I word this? Because I know that we touched on death a lot. And I feel like when people think about grief, they think about death, but death isn't the only thing that people grieve. Right. Yeah, death isn't the only thing that people grieve. So do you find that people may approach you about other situations outside of death, or does support maybe look similar or different if people are going through alternate situations? I don't want to just like rest heavy on that. I feel like grief is grief, but is there levels to grief? Is it levels to it based on what you're going through?
Absolutely. And I think that's a phenomenal question. And phenomenal is my favorite word, just so you know.
Thank you for sharing that with me. I feel like I'm on fire with this interview.
Fire.
Because I am just this, like I said, this is something that has been kind of wrestling with me, and questions that have been kind of circling inside of me because of my own residual grief and my own reasons of wanting to support people, and just this very empathic feelings that I've had basically throughout all of 2020. So I feel like I'm just like kind of letting it all out right now. And who better to do that with?
That's what we're doing. I love that. And I love that question, because that's one thing that I always do try to communicate is grief by definition is deep sorrow. And so it continues in that definition that a lot of times death is an example, but loss, which a lot of people have suffered this past year in unimaginable ways, is a big thing. And that has been a big topic. Jobs, like you said, relationship, being able to interact with family and friends. And those things are real. Children have been suffering a huge amounts of grief from just play dates, going to the corner to play with whoever and not being able to do that. That's a loss. And these are a lot of things. But I will tell you, I think one of the biggest things, and I also struggle with this as well, when it comes to loss, not death, is grieving the living. Mm-hmm. Child, that can take us into a whole nother many hours.
Tell me a little bit more.
But grieving the living, so grieving those relationships with people that are still alive. Now, that can be in so many different ways. It can be a parent-child. It can be a friendship. It can be so many different ways. And I think that that's one that I've had to be open to. And I've talked to a couple people about it. And to answer your question, it is a similar grieving process. The only difference with that, though, is that there could, in some circumstances, be a potential of reconciliation. Whereas with death, it's a finality. However, my therapist has told me that just because the person died doesn't mean that you can't find resolution within yourself with the loss of that relationship. Maybe, to an extent, time has expired. They passed away. I wasn't able to apologize. We weren't able to figure it out, or whatever the case is. But with the living, depending on the circumstances, you could potentially find that reconciliation after you find the resolution within yourself. And so as long as you're still alive, you can still get to, in my opinion, certain levels of peace with circumstances. There are some people who are just flat out angry and they just don't understand and they're bitter. And so I try to talk to them about forgiving people who never apologized, and that getting through these types of losses is really only person and thing that you can control in it is you. So while the grieving process, the mourning parts of it can be similar, there's definitely differences. And I also don't believe that all loss is created equal. For if you lose your job and if you get divorced, kind of different, right? So no matter which, if you wanted to be divorced or not, it's still a lot different. You can get a job easier probably than I've got to sort my house stuff out. We got all of these things intertwined. And so I don't think it's all equal, but it's kind of similar. But the grieving the living is really one that people deal with a lot. Losing friendships, breakups. Let me tell you something. Next to the losses that to death, breakups with people, I don't even know where they are in the world. But at one point, you can't sleep, you can't eat, you're sick, and you're playing R&B songs as if this is going to make you cry more. Right. But it's like, what are you doing? Did you just want to trigger this? But those are things that can't be overlooked because they're hard as heck for people to rebound from and bounce back. You just did life with this person for X amount of time, and now they're no longer here for whatever reason, whether it's their decision, they did something wrong. Because I think that's the other thing. I'm kind of rambling, but the one thing I say is that sometimes people could feel guilty, and I have felt this way, for even feeling sad about people and relationships that I don't think they really care about me or care about the circumstance. So it's like, why do I care? Well, because you don't change because of them. You're still you. So no matter someone's behaviors and their actions and what they did to you doesn't change you. Yeah. You still honor you no matter how. So if it hurt you, don't be embarrassed to say that. Don't be ashamed. Don't be so tough to say, my mom walked out on me when I was this age. This person's been incarcerated for this amount of years and I haven't been able to see them or build that relationship. That's grief. That's deep sorrow. Right. And I know people that's dealing with all of those things. And I've dealt with a lot of those things. My older brother being incarcerated was something that I had to really evaluate. And not now, he's not, but he did a nice amount of time, I think over 78 months. And it was a real loss, not only for myself, but for my nephews and for his wife and my mom and my grandmom at the time. And so it's like, we don't look at that necessarily maybe as grief, but it's grief for us and it's grief for them. Right. Just because somebody made some decisions that might have put themselves in jail doesn't mean that it's not sorrowful. Right. Right. So hopefully that answered that. But yeah, absolutely. People deal with a lot. Pet loss. I think pet loss gets overlooked. There are so many different things like that happen. Mm-hmm. Maybe you were an athlete and you were injured. And so the dreams and the visions you have for your life are no longer. And that happens a lot. How about if you were a woman or a man, in this case, just being open, but if you planned on having a child, I have infertility issues. I have fertility issues. So it's not that you lost a child because you never had a child, but you lost the idea, the possibility. It's like you said, it's levels to this. It is super deep, but I've pretty much heard almost all of it, and it all deserves to be honored. Honor your pain, no matter what other people say. If it affects you, then it needs your attention, period.
That's true. That's so true. I think that's the perfect lead into what I ultimately wanted to get to is this idea of tapping into your higher self during the grieving process. That was a big question for me throughout December. Like, how do I know all these things? Like, how do I know that life is temporary? How do I know that there is, an afterlife or a life beyond this realm? How do I know the things of the spirit that still feel these like very physical and human emotions, surrounding loss? And so I was thinking during the time, like, wow, if I could just like push past like the grief, if I could just push past this and tap into those things that I know. Like, I know that there's life beyond this. I know that there's something other than this world. All these things that we see are very temporary. Like, I know that. But right now, I'm sitting in a very like grievous position, trying to get past these human emotions that I obviously cannot help. Like, how do you get over that hump? Like, even when you have an understanding, and I guess it's just according to people's belief system. So that's my personal belief system, like knowing that this is just a realm, a temporary plane, that we are here to experience. And so in me knowing that, why would I like be drowned in so much grief with it, which is very human, like very emotional?
Yes. So I think that is probably one of the realest things someone has said in a conversation, and that it speaks to me so deeply because I struggle with that. So as much as you were able to be really convicted and straightforward with that, saying like, I know these things to be true. Mm-hmm. I bounce back and forth with what I know to be true. And so I actually am the opposite, where I feel like if I was more on that 100% side that I know these things to be true, it could potentially help ease it a little bit more. But at the same time, I think that the PS to it is that you are human. Mm-hmm. And so God, I choose to believe in God, knew that we would suffer in this world. But he was supposed to be, or whatever you call him, I'm just speaking from my own self, but was supposed to be our refuge and our anchor. Mm-hmm. And so it's not, so we won't go without those feelings of being in that grief and that mourning state. We can't, it's nothing that can escape you from that. This is my experience and the people that I've spoken to. No one does not feel. And we're going to do that. And it's just being able to navigate that and manage that. And so I think the crisis part of it will subside. So we might not always feel so like emotionally overwhelmed and like just in this and sad and heavy and whatever the case is. But grief in terms of losses of loved ones and just seeing that whole thing, for me, I've accepted that's going to be forever. I will never not grieve the losses of my loved ones. I will always love them. So as long as I love them, that's not going to change. But grief is the inward thinking and expressions of it. Mourning is the outward expression. So I'm not always in a state of mourning. Okay. So sometimes I think that we are in that space because I'm not a firm believer of the 5 stages of grief in terms of them being linear. I think we do experience those 5 emotions, but not just like straight across. So we can go like all up and down. So you can be in that deep rut and then you might find a peaceful season. And then you might find yourself smack back in that where your mind is swirling. Like, I know that there's something on the other side. I know that there's bigger and better. Why can't I feel this? Well, I mean, why can't I overcome this or shake this is a better probably expression. Mm-hmm. Just let yourself feel it for real. Because I think sometimes a lot of the extra stress and anxiety we put on our healing journey is the needing to know, the understanding, the explanation, because it doesn't even, my dad is in a jar upstairs in my house. Now, whoever I love that's listening to this, I'm sorry to tell you this, but this is what, when you went there, I felt like I can go here. I work in my living room. I work from home now. So I'm literally on a couch sitting, typing on my computer, and right over my computer is my dad's urn. How am I supposed to process that? So it's been 2 years and I'm still like, what? Like, how? So part of me can say, well, his soul, based on my belief and my upbringing, is resting with the Lord. And that's not him. His body is just a shell. But it all sounds fine.
Right.
But when you're in that, it doesn't feel fine. Right. And I don't feel guilty about that. And I don't think that there's honestly no explanation that someone can give me for me to feel okay with that every day. There's just going to be seasons where it's just super mind boggling. Like, wait, how did this even happen? Literally, the clothes that I picked out for him, they got burned. It just went right through this thing. And then you call me and say, oh, your dad's cremains are ready. Like, what? Now I got to go pick up this thing and bring it where? Whoa, back to my house and put it on my mantle, because if I put it in the closet, I don't love them enough and it's just not right. And then, but if I put it here, I'm constantly seeing it. And then, but I still got to work. I still got to show up. I still got to be myself. And that's the expectation that we're putting on each other and people and ourselves, but leaving out the part of trying to even process this crap. Right. So I think, in fairness to all of ourselves, we got to really look at everything that you just said, everything that I just said, and normalize that and not make it such a feeling where you feel isolated and defeated because you know better. I know better. I know that to be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord. Why am I not smiling and rejoicing because that person's not suffering? Because I want them here. That's why. I'm human. I understand what I'm trying to get to mentally and spiritually, but I'm not there. Today, I'm pissed off. I'm angry. I don't understand it, and it's okay. But God is a healer, and joy does come in the morning, and we will be able to get to those points because that is the anchor of our lives. But in reality, that's why we have a higher power, because he knew that we would suffer. I think it's like, blessed are those that mourn. Now, if that's not one of those things I learned in Bible study, then I'm sorry, but I think it is. So I think that we have to mourn, and that God knew that we would mourn and we shouldn't feel guilty for it. And sometimes people say we shouldn't question God. But to be honest with you, I think in our questioning, we get a stronger faith, because then we get closer to answers, or closer to ourselves in terms of finding that autonomy within that we need to move through. So you just open up Pandora's box by having that topic with me. But I just think it's such a beautiful thing to talk about, although it can be difficult when you're going through it.
No, I mean, sometimes we really have to have these difficult conversations. And I'm hoping that people are grasping on to some words, connecting to what's being said, and just knowing that, you're not the only one who has these emotions or these feelings or these thoughts. Even though grief can be very individualized, we all have experienced it at some level. So it's just, and I think people, and this is how we started the conversation, people start to feel alone in their grief, like nobody knows how they're feeling, or they don't want to bother people with that, but if we, like you have done, can just create community around that, and like, again, you said, normalize, these sides of the spectrum, how people, the range of how people feel with grief, then hopefully people will begin to connect more and express more and feel comfortable with their vulnerability. I think that's a huge piece of it. People don't like to feel vulnerable, and I think grief brings that. Grief brings vulnerability.
Yes, I love that. Grief brings vulnerability, and it is so necessary if you want to get to the other side. But the other thing too, I would definitely want to add before we end up out of here is that I've accepted that I can't escape the fact that joy and pain have to live within me at the same time. It just has to. And it can be minute to minute, hour to hour. I can't even go as far as to say day to day because it just really depends on what the trigger is or what it is. And so I might have, today was very sunny out and have a great day. And then by night's fall, I could be feeling down. When you lose these people, you lose these things, you lose these relationships and all of those things, you're really having to understand that the emotional deficiency can be real. And so if you try to just run or stay on one side, I just don't think it's healthy either way. Mm-hmm. To have this extreme level of joy that cannot be 100% genuine if you are a human being, whether you communicate it or not. But then also to be on the side of just really immersed in your pain and just not really trying to move. And there's a lot of people here in that side that I think sometimes, to be honest with you, when people are there, I just have to give that to God, because some people just don't want to be healed right now. And that is okay. Do it on your time. But the goal, in my opinion, is for you to get to the middle, to have those both live within inside of yourself and learn to trust yourself with those moments and just not allow them to become these potholes that you stay in, and just rather just little speed bumps, just up, that moment wasn't that great. Yesterday wasn't phenomenal, but hey, tomorrow does have the possibility to be better. So I think once I stopped trying to get back to who I used to be and how I used to feel prior to these losses, I felt more free. I was able to like move better. But when I kept saying like, man, I just don't feel like myself. I'm angry. I want to have my family here. I want to do this. And I want, like, if you're like, oh, I wanted that job. I wanted to play in that league. I was supposed to do this and, we're not getting back to that.
Right.
So the faster you can accept that. So I don't think I'll ever really accept the deaths per se, 100%, but I have accepted that my life as I knew it prior to those losses is not coming back. Doesn't mean I can't have a great life. Doesn't mean that I can't have joy and peace and happiness, but that version is gone.
It's different than
it's definitely different.
Imagined it would be.
Yep.
I think that's an important point that you brought up, that some people either don't want to be healed or are not ready to experience healing. Again, kind of like resting in that grief. Because oddly enough, it probably has become like a place of refuge for them because that's all they know.
Yeah.
I know particularly for me, I had a partner who lost their father at a very young age. So they had never even gotten the opportunity to know who this person was, but carries that grief with them. Now, even like 30 some odd years later. And it's not that I didn't understand it, but because of the way I manage and process, grief, I can't understand like how people don't want to be healed or don't want to experience what the other side is. And people really get tied onto these memories, or even these memories that don't exist, these things that could have been if this series of events didn't happen. Do you have a word for people? I can't even say for people who feel stuck, because maybe they don't even feel like they're stuck. It's just an existence for them. But for people who, I would say, aren't ready to experience healing, because this person actually said to me, like, I can't move past this. I will never move past this. Like, I'm forever broken where this person is. So is this like, what kind of word do you have for that?
To be completely honest, when people are in that place, it's heartbreaking for me because they don't know that the joy can still exist. And at some point, to some extent, I was kind of sort of like that, but not 100% because I think how you do life is how you do loss. And I've just always been a resilient person, even when it's come to other types of traumas and issues in my life, not so much just death and loss of loved ones. So I do think a lot of it, I just said this recently, we only can operate from our operating system. And so that person for 30 something odd years has chose to rest, if you will, settle in that grief and settle in that loss and that mindset. I do believe that God is a miracle worker and a healer, but I also think that the faith part of it without the action is dead. And so for that person, I would really truthfully in the most honest way say, well, then you need to accept the quality of life that you have. Yeah. And it's just a reality in that consider the other people, whether that's your children or your spouse or your coworkers or whoever, they're only going to get this version of yourself. And then that's going to affect their lives as well. So sometimes I encourage people that if you can't find the willingness to make those changes for yourself because you don't care, this is where you want to be, find one person or two, or maybe three if you have that many, that can become your why. What would it mean to you to have your child's life hindered, their healing and their ability to become their best selves because of your stubbornness and your anger and your issues? So if you don't want to do it for yourself, darn it, do it for somebody else, because now you're going into other relationships like you had a partner and you're bringing that there and you're leaving that there. And then so that's affecting that person, which then will affect the next person they potentially interact with. And so it's this chain thing. So if we can just take accountability and understand that like no one is coming to save you, no one. You have to do it. And if you don't want to do it, as some people have said and we're saying here, that's okay. But let people know that up front. Like, let's start giving disclaimers. Just say, yo, I'm broken and I really like being broken. I must like it because I'm not doing anything about it, period. So people can stop feeling like they got a potential to help you or to make you feel better and wasting their time when you already know that it's better for me to make excuses. People have literally been through hell, seriously. And they overcome because they chose to. So I have to tell those people, take your time. You might not be ready right now. And that's a different story. I think it's different when wounds are fresh and when you're just processing and you perhaps are in the denial part of things. That's a total different thing than we talking 30 years, 20 years, 10 years down the line. I'm not using the number because I don't think that time heals all wounds. I think people who use their time to heal will heal. So I'm not saying it based on that, but I'm saying that when you have let something linger for that long, the bitterness behind it, the anger or whatever, that's how you want it to be. Me personally, I'm not spending time on those kind of people and call it what you want. I am the grief bully. I'm here to help people who want to potentially heal, who may not have solved this as a possibility for themselves. And maybe I can exemplify that to you and show you that I've been hurt too. I have felt broken too, but light still shines through broken things. Broken crayons still color. So if you want to use the word broken, that's not the period to your story. You can take that crayon and make a comma if you choose to. Right. But people need to just start being honest, Queen, and just say, listen, this is just where I'm at. I'm messed up and I like being messed up. So let me be messed up and you move on to somebody who's more proactive in their healing and better matches you and your self-care language and your glow and your wine and all that. And if it ain't that, then you got to keep it moving. I'm going to pray for you.
Right. Well, I'm doing all right for myself right now.
Okay. I see the glow. I see the glow. So I already know.
Appreciate it. But yeah, and I appreciate you saying all of that because it is just so true. And to this day, I still pray for that person and just like keep it pushing because I couldn't imagine being in that state of consistent bitterness, like just with life.
Well, I do want to say too, I'm so sorry. And I do have to say this too, because, right, I want to make a disclaimer that mental illness and mental wellness are different. So
yes.
I am talking about people who are able, not people who are really dealing with things that are like way deeper, because grief meets you where you are. So if you're struggling with mental illness before a loss or before these things, that just makes it a little more complicated and adds different layers to it. And so again, with that, that's why we do need to be proactive with our mental wellness and make that a priority. But those are two different things. So I don't want to make it seem like someone who's dealing with this deep level of mental illness and then they deal with loss and then now they can't. But I'm talking about people who are able to clearly communicate, I'm just too hurt, I'm just too broken, I'm just too stuck, I'm just too bitter. It's not easy. I'm not saying that you just make a decision, then one day your life is just better, you're happy, but I feel like as long as you make the decision that you want to get to that point, then that's where the journey, that's where we're headed. Yeah. We either we're just sitting here or we're just heading towards somewhere. Hopefully we get there, but I just needed to add that too, because I don't want to make it like it's just this simple, easy thing and that everyone's dealing with the same deck, because unfortunately we're not. I'm
so glad that you mentioned that, the difference between mental illness and wellness, because that's important to note. And grief can be a trigger for people's mental issues overall.
Yes.
But that's probably a whole nother. I feel like we can just go down this whole other road.
We can just be here for hours, for real. We're gonna have to have a part two, because it's just gonna keep going and going. And I talk a lot, and you talk a little bit. So.
I know. I mean, I always say, well, I listen a lot. When people say they talk a lot,
I think you talk a lot. I think you talk a lot. I'm kidding with you. I think you talk a lot. I think the last time we met, we were just talking, like we just talk. So
yeah. Yeah. So I think that this is a good place to kind of transition this conversation out, because like I said, we can go down another road, but let's just do a part two. Like
whenever, hit me up. I am here to support everything that you're trying to do, and I appreciate it.
Yeah, we'll do a check-in, like, mid-year or whatever, and see where we're at with things, and maybe pick up the other, well, I won't say the other half, the next part of this conversation, because apparently the questions can go on and on. Yes, Adina J said, yes, part two. Yeah, because I feel like we covered a lot of ground tonight, and I'm so grateful for this conversation. I'm almost kicking myself for not having it sooner. But it is, such a time as this. This is definitely necessary, and I'm glad that we had the opportunity to get it in amidst our issues in the beginning, but we pushed through on this one, and I hope that others really grab hold of how genuine and authentic and real this conversation was, and how necessary it is right now. I'm hoping that people really tap in to this conversation, save it, share it, hold on to it, because you might need it for a reference point at another time. And make sure you're following Jay Nicole, the Grief Bully, so you can check out her podcast, because she really has tackled grief and what it looks like in others, and also building community around how we can help and support each other. So I'm just grateful for that. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, guys. Yeah, definitely just follow me. I hang out the most on Instagram at I_AM_Jay Nicole. Also have a YouTube channel where I have tons of content as well. So you just go to youtube.com/Jay Nicole the Grief Bully and hit me up with any questions, and I appreciate it. Keep doing your thing. I love when we connect. So I'm looking forward to part two.
Thank you so much. And I will talk to you soon.
Sounds good. Peace.
Peace.